This is the United Podcast Network.
Welcome to Spouses Talking Houses with husband and wife real estate team Jennifer and Brian Frost. Everything you want to know about buying, selling, investing, and owning property. So let's get real about real estate.
Welcome back to Spouses Talking Houses. I'm Jennifer, and I'm a solo spouse today. Brian is attending an an inspection, and we have a guest today who is Kevin Smith.
Thanks for having me, Jennifer.
You're welcome. He's the town manager with the town of Londonderry, and today we're going to get real about the tax and budget calendar in these towns because it is highly confusing.
It is.
It is highly confusing.
For the layperson, it can be very difficult to understand.
Exactly. It's taken me, I still count on my fingers, the months. But anyway, before we get to that, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the realtor lifestyle and what we've been up to. And what we've been up to lately is real estate 24/7. We've been relaxed from stay at home to safer at home, and we are just out straight, showing properties, writing offers, closings. And this is the 30th of June, so this is typically one of the busiest closings days of the year. Last Friday, the 26th, is what I would call Black Friday for real estate, because June is the busiest closing month, Fridays are the busiest closing day, the end of the month is the busiest. Mm-hmm. So, all the moving trucks are out there right now.
So you're almost beyond it.
Beyond it,
You can breathe a little easier starting tomorrow, right?
Yeah, just got to be careful to put a few bucks in the bank for December. So thank you so much for joining us, Kevin. I appreciate this.
I'm happy to be here, and hopefully I can provide some wisdom into the tax rate setting process and how tax bills are configured and any other questions that are on people's minds about how this all operates.
Well, I would imagine the number one thing that causes the phone to ring at town hall would be the property taxes.
It always does.
Yes.
Yeah.
People pay attention to that.
It's always a property taxes. And even if we've had years where property taxes go down, everyone will swear they've never had a year where their property taxes have gone down.
Well, I'll agree with that. Yeah. I'll agree with the common perception.
And then I have to point out to them in what years it actually did go down.
So how long have you been the town manager for Londonderry?
It's been 8 years. It'll be 8 years this August. Actually, time has flown by.
It has, yeah.
Yeah, it really has. I've really enjoyed it, though. You find your niche. I'm sure, like you with doing real estate, and even on the bad days, you can look back and say it was all worth it.
Yeah. Well, I think you've done quite a bit of work on the budget and on the commercial tax base,
right?
From what I can see.
Yeah, and that's been by design. We don't want the residential taxpayers to have to shoulder the entire burden of the tax base in Londonderry, and so we've tried to bring in a lot of industry, commercial, and industrial to help offset that residential taxes in town. And right now, I'd say the mix is probably about 37, 60.
So 37 would be commercial?
37 would be about commercial,
okay.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. All right. Excellent. So my very first question is, when we get our tax bill, most people assume, hey, I just got my June bill. I'm paying 6 months worth of taxes, and that means I'm going to be paid through the end of the year.
Right.
But that's not what it covers.
No, you get two tax bills. You get that first bill that's typically due July 1st, and then you have the December bill.
Right.
And the December bill is what is reflective of the tax rate that's set every year. So kind of backing up, in Londonderry, we have a fiscal year that runs from July 1 to June 30. And typically what happens is we have the budget process that starts in earnest in November,
right,
and goes through town meeting day in March when the voters vote on it. At that time, we have an estimated tax rate that's based on the budget that's being passed. Which are we're live TV, so there might be some background noise that people can hear, but that's okay.
Yeah.
So they vote on the budget in March. Those are your appropriations. That's really the only thing that's known at that point that is a definite when you're thinking about what the tax rate is actually going to be for that next fiscal year, because we don't actually set the rate until October
Right.
During the calendar year. So you know your appropriations in March based on what's voted on. Here's what you don't know. You estimate your total valuation in town,
Right.
but you don't actually know what the total valuation is going to be until after April 1st.
Because April 1st is the date that the valuation
Is set for that year.
Right.
Yeah. And so when you're voting on the budget in March, you're estimating at that time what that valuation is going to be. But we typically won't even know, even though April 1st is a cutoff date for that year, a lot of our valuations come in late over the summer, especially on the commercial side and the utility side.
Oh, right.
So we always take a guess. We've been using 1%, 1.5% over the last, I'd say, 7 years.
As far as an adjustment?
Yes.
Upwards?
From year to year.
Okay. Yep.
Which is a very conservative estimate because we've probably been averaging more like 2.5.
Yeah.
But we always want to kind of paint a worst case scenario, because the worst thing you can do is estimate a tax rate that's lower than what the actual rate ends up being.
Oh, your phones would definitely ring.
No question.
Yeah.
No question.
Yeah.
They would definitely ring if that happened, but I can tell you they never ring when we come in with a lower rate than what we estimated.
Yeah.
So the valuation, that's one area. The other area is your revenues, your revenue estimates. And again, we really don't know, and especially this year, and we can talk about that with regard to the pandemic, but we won't know our true revenue estimates until the fall because every town gets rooms and meals tax from the state, but they don't let us know until the fall how much our rooms and meals are.
I never thought about that.
Yep.
Okay.
And the other one is your highway block grant. Also comes from the state, which is in the millions of dollars. But we won't know that until the fall either, because the state doesn't release its revenue numbers to us until the fall. So we always use the prior year's allocation as our number.
Right.
But again, those are all estimates at that point. And now, especially like a year this year, so we had our rooms and meals and our highway block grant estimates that we used last year when we did our estimate this year. But we know rooms and meals is probably going to be down.
Right.
And highway block grant, because it's largely dependent on the gas tax, is going to be down too, because nobody was on the roads March through May.
Okay.
So these will all be revised in the fall.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So what happens is the voters vote in March. The valuations are set April 1st, but we don't know them truly until the summertime. And then the revenues we don't know until the fall. So by the time October rolls around, which is the tax rate setting time, that's when we actually know what the true valuation is, what the revenues are, and then we can set the tax rate. And so people get their December bill is based on that new tax rate.
That's your actual bill.
That's your actual bill. The July bill is simply half of what
of your estimated bill.
Yes.
Right.
Correct.
And so what will happen is if your estimated bill was off by $200 for the half year, the adjustment's going to be $400 on the December bill because they're adjusting for the full year on the half year bill.
Correct.
And so that's also why people will think that if they doubled the December bill, that's what their new bill is, and that's not correct. Yeah.
Right.
And that leads to panic in phone calls.
Yes.
Yeah.
It does.
Yeah.
And you know, understandably, I totally understand why people get confused by it, because the way I just explained it to you, there's all these moving parts to it, and it's really difficult to estimate. The only thing you can really count on is what your July bill is, because you can usually count on taking that December bill, doing 50% of it, and that's your July bill.
Right.
The true up bill, though, then comes in December. So like you said, you can't just pay a little bit more in July and think, I'm good now for December. The other thing is from time to time, tax bills do go down.
Right.
And so sometimes you may have had not an overpayment, but a higher payment in July, and then that gets adjusted in December.
And again, the adjustment will have twice the impact because you're getting adjusted for the whole year on the half year bill.
Yep.
Well, and of course, mortgage companies, most of us have the escrows for our property taxes.
Right.
And by law, they need to give us a statement twice a year and do an adjustment on our bill. And so because of this cycle, what will inevitably happen is that my December bill forces an adjustment one way or the other.
Right.
But they over adjust.
Right.
Because it's 12 months worth of adjustment on a 6-month bill. And so then in the spring, they have to readjust again.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, it's just never going to sync up.
Right.
Yeah.
No, it won't. And if there was a better way to do it, I'm sure we would have figured it out by now.
Right,
But unfortunately, there isn't.
Now, it seems to me every town in New Hampshire that I've had closings in has been on that April fiscal year.
Mhm.
So is that something that is statewide, or did it just happen that way?
Most are on the fiscal year, the July to June fiscal year. There's some who still are on calendar years.
Okay.
But it's for budgeting purposes, it's a lot easier to be on that because town meetings have to take place in March for the most part. You know, there are.
Is that an RSA that it has to be? Okay.
Yes, according to state statute. But
Yeah.
there are cities and communities, most of them do it in March, but there are some that do also do it in the springtime as well. You do have the authority to move it, but typically I would say 80% are doing it in March, right? And so if you're on a calendar fiscal year, you're essentially operating on a budget that hasn't been approved yet for the first 3.5 months.
Right. Right.
So that's why most communities are on the fiscal year, the July to June fiscal year, so they don't run into that problem of having to operate on a budget that hasn't been approved yet.
And Concord's the only town that I've run into so far, it's a city actually, that does quarterly tax bills instead of the twice a year. So that's not state mandated, that's a town community choice?
If they're doing it quarterly, so keep in mind, New Hampshire's not a home rule state, so communities can only do what the state allows them to do.
Okay.
So if they're billing quarterly, then the state has allowed them the authority to do that, through state statute to do it quarterly. But most communities, I think you would find, do it biannually.
Okay.
And not the quarterly on tax. Now, we do our sewer taxes quarterly.
Right.
So if you're on municipal sewer, you will get a quarterly tax bill.
Yep. So when I get that June bill, that's covering the second and third quarter of the year. So it covers April,
Right.
May, June,
Yep.
July, August, September.
Right.
And then when I get the December bill, it's covering the fourth quarter and the first quarter.
Correct.
So I'm going October 1st through March 31st, correct?
That's right.
Okay. So I'm going backwards and forwards.
Mhm.
And we're on a fiscal year that actually goes
July to
June.
Yep.
See, I'm already confused.
Yeah, I know.
And then we throw in revaluation. Was this a revaluation year for Londonderry?
It was.
Yeah,
It was. Well,
which is why Facebook blew up.
So last year, yes. So last year was a revaluation year, which affected everyone's tax bill that they got in December of 2019.
Okay.
And so what the revaluation, so we hadn't had a revaluation in 5 years. At a minimum, you have to have it done by state law every 5 years.
5 years, right.
Yeah. There are some communities now that are doing it every other year. There's no set on how often you can do it. It's just
Right.
at a minimum, you have to do it every 5 years. The problem with doing it every 5 years is, as you know, the market can have incredible
Big
fluctuations
changes, yeah.
in 5 years.
Right.
And in our case, with the last one having been in 2014, I'm imagining you've been in real estate longer than 5 years. You know what the market...
30-something, yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you know what the market did from 2014 to 2019.
Just went up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so people's home values, the assessments skyrocketed. The Department of Revenue every year gives the communities what's called an equalization ratio.
Right.
That tells you what your ratio is of assessments to the market and what the market's doing in your community. And what the Department of Revenue, what their standard is they basically say, we want you to be either 10%, no more than 10% below or 10% above market. They like you to be at 100%,
Right.
but they'll allow you to go as low as 90 and as high as 110. In our case, in Londonderry, we were down to 84%.
Oh, we
Below
were way
market.
off. Okay.
Yeah, way
Yeah.
off. And you explain that to people because people will go, oh my gosh, I can't believe what my assessment, there's no way my home will sell for this. Oh, have you looked around?
I was going to say, have them call me.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
It's true. Your house is worth a lot more.
Absolutely is true.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we had to make a huge adjustment. And that's why people saw anywhere from 18, most people saw anywhere from 18 to 22% adjustments on their assessments, because we were so far under assessing. Now, I know you're going to find this very hard to believe, Jennifer, but nobody called our office looking to pay more in taxes during that time.
Nobody
if you can
did.
believe that.
I can believe that.
I know it's
I can believe
probably
that.
a bit shocking.
Well, sometimes people will ask me, they'll say, I'm buying this house for $400 and it's only assessed at $330. Is the town, when they see the sales price, gonna jack it up? And my answer is no. So
Correct.
Your pickups that you make in between revaluation years are only if there's a building permit or something, or an abatement, correct?
Yep, that's absolutely correct.
Right.
Yeah. So we're not out there targeting every time a home. We couldn't do it that way.
Right.
Your pickups are if you add something or if you file for an abatement, building permits, as you mentioned. Otherwise, it'll happen in that revaluation year, because we're obviously looking at what the market is doing, and for new homes, new construction,
right?
We're capturing those as well
as of April 1st. So
Correct.
If the house was half done on April 1st, they're going to have a year's worth of tax bill based on a 50% finished
Correct.
home, and then the next April you'll pick up the full.
That's right.
So I did know that the state monitored the equalization rates, because I actually will pull down that spreadsheet, particularly when I have people relocating and they want to know what the tax rates are in the different towns. Every time we have a closing, we have to fill out a form called a PA something, might be 386 or whatever. Mm-hmm. But that's for the state, and it is for the purpose of them tracking real estate values. Mm-hmm. Do you know if that's the database that they use?
I'm sure. I don't know for certain that's the database they use, but I'm pretty certain that that information is included in the formula they're using,
right,
to help come up with this equalization ratio for the town. Interestingly, when we did our reval in 2019, we got our equalization ratio in the late winter, I think in March of 2020 for 2019. We're still at about 98%. We're not even at 100%.
Not even at 100%.
Yeah. Because again, it was based on April 1st's values last year in 2019.
Okay, yeah.
Between that time and when they gave us our equalization ratio, the market kept going up.
Right.
The other problem with being so far below on your equalization ratio is commercial properties, high-valued commercial properties will file abatements based on that equalization ratio.
Okay.
And there's legal precedent that they have to be able to do that, and there's not much we can do to deny the abatements when they put in for it based on that equalization ratio. So in other words, if their property is assessed at $15 million, and our equalization ratio is at 85%, their abatement is saying we should have only been taxed at 85%, not 100% of the value.
So that's a killer. Yeah.
Oh, it's a huge killer, which is why. So we've talked about going to assessments every other year now.
Okay.
Bedford recently did it.
Yeah.
There's some other communities that have done it as well, but it's just to stop the huge fluctuations that are happening every 5 years.
Well, and actually when the market goes down, the impact is even worse.
Correct.
Because you've already set your budget, and then you have no choice but to jack up the rate.
Right.
Conversely, some people will think, because their property taxes went up, that you just got a huge windfall in your budget.
Right.
That's not correct.
No, it isn't. No, It's not. Because, so the other thing is that all things being equal, let's say all the assessments went up 18%, your tax bill is going to be exactly the same.
Right.
Because as the assessments go up, we have to, you're then you're still collecting the same amount total.
Right. You can only spend what's in the budget.
Right. So, but in this case, you had the budget that was passed in March of 2019. So say we didn't have a reassessment. That budget that was passed in March 2019 had a modest-sized tax increase in it. It wasn't huge, but it was a modest-sized tax increase. That had it not been a revaluation year, most people probably would have thought, oh, my tax bill went up a little bit, but nothing. You add into that the revaluation that happened, because the other piece that happened is that while our residential assessment values were way below market. The commercials weren't as much.
No.
And again, you know that being in real estate, if you look at commercial, they haven't gone up as fast as
they have
residential.
not. Yeah.
So there was an adjustment in the assessments in that the burden shifted a little bit toward the residential. So as residentials were increased by, say, I'm just using numbers here, round numbers, say residential went up on a whole by 20%, commercial may have gone up by 14%. So that burden shifts now to the residential side.
Yeah.
So you had a revaluation, you had the burden shift to residential, and you had a modest size tax increase all hit in the same year. And that's why people more or less freaked out when they got their tax bill.
And their tax bill is an estimate still.
In December?
No, the one that just came out.
The one that came out in July.
Right.
Yes,
yeah,
but the
June,
one right, but the one that came out that people are getting now should be close to 50% of what their December tax bill was, because it is an estimate, but it's an estimate based on what the December tax bill was.
Okay, so that tax rate on the December bill was based on a revaluation, so there shouldn't be a huge fluctuation when we get.
Should not have been.
Okay.
No.
All right. Okay.
Right.
So.
If anything, they actually should have. If they compare the bill they just got to the one they got in December, they should have actually seen a little bit of a decrease because that adjustment was made in December.
Right. Which was a double increase versus this one being
Correct.
50%. I thought mine looked reasonable, and nobody ever says that, but I thought mine looked reasonable when I opened it.
Yep.
There's been a lot of different lawsuits in the state about how we fund education, and this whole idea of you have to reassess within 5 years. I remember when that was instituted.
Mm-hmm.
Salem, New Hampshire, where we are right now, famously had never done any sort of revaluation. And I also remember at that time that Derry was doing a rolling revaluation where they would do 25% of their properties each year, so that they were hopefully going to even out that impact.
Yep.
But they are not doing that anymore. And is that something that Londonderry ever considered?
We do. We do 20% of the town every 5. We do look at 25% of the town annually.
Okay.
But again, that's only to look at either depreciation or additions that have been made. We're not doing market revaluations on 20% of the town every year. So we do look at that. The assessors are out there looking at all these homes, but it's to pick things up more or less. Or if in the case if a home has deteriorated, it's to lower the value.
So if you go to every 2 years, we'll have more even.
People won't see wild swings. Yeah, in their assessments going forward every 5 years.
But I expect there's a cost to the town for who do we use? Patriot Properties?
We are with Vision right now. We had Patriot previously. Yeah. And so we just switched to Vision. That was one of the things we worked into the contract, was being able to have them do it on the residentials every other year. And so it shouldn't have a big impact on the budget, since we're more or less already budgeting for it in our new contract with Vision. It's the commercials in the industrial that cost us a lot. And usually what happens is we'll contract with an appraiser who is certified in that area to do that once every 5 years. So we may not be able to capture a lot of the increased commercial or increase or decrease commercial and industrial values every other year like we will the residential.
Yeah, and I don't know if you know, but my husband Brian is an appraiser, and commercial is a lot more difficult to do valuations because as hard as it is with residential sometimes to find apples to apples,
right?
Commercial and retail is completely different.
And even more difficult than those ones are your utility valuations.
Right.
Now, the legislature has recently passed some legislation over the last few years that dictate how you are to value utilities going forward, because there were wild different appraisals of utilities from community to community, and the utility companies basically said, enough
Right.
of this.
Right.
The state valued them one way. Londonderry did another way. Merrimack, everyone was doing it kind of differently from
Okay.
town to town.
Right.
Unfortunately for Londonderry, we are such a utility-rich community that these changes in the rules the legislature has made do not favor us at all.
Oh.
Well, the utilities, God bless them, they have very good lobbying
Of
firms.
course they do. Yeah.
And they've been lobbying for years for the legislature to change the way that the communities are able to assess them.
So what do we have for utilities that are taxable in
Well,
Londonderry?
Eversource
Yep.
is a big one. Liberty Utilities, the gas.
Yep.
You have your poles and conduits, some of which are owned by Fairpoint,
Okay.
which actually just got bought out by another company that's escaping my name at the moment, Consolidated.
Okay. Right. Yep.
I believe there might be some co-op utility in town as well for electrical.
Okay. I had no idea about any of this.
You have
I mean, I knew we had utilities.
Yeah.
I had no idea about the local taxes. Yeah.
Well, I mean, all the poles and wires,
Yeah.
right? Those are all taxed. All of the huge transmission lines you see in town, which we
Right.
have a lot of,
We do.
those are all taxed. There's a huge substation by Scobie Pond on the dairy line. That is heavily taxed. You have the power plant, which doesn't really fall into a utility, though
It's considered commercial real estate.
it is.
Okay.
Yeah. But that's a whole beast in of itself.
And they filed for an abatement more than
yeah.
once, didn't they?
Oh, they filed for an abatement a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
A huge abatement, basically half of their value. They believe they're worth half of what we're currently assessing them at, and we're currently assessing them at around $450 million.
So this is a big
It's huge.
impact.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what happened with their abatement?
Nothing's happened yet.
It's still out there.
The lawyers are involved.
And once that is resolved,
Yeah.
they're going to potentially get credited back to when they initially filed the abatement.
Not necessarily.
Okay.
There may be a settlement at
Okay.
some point.
Wow.
And there may be no settlement.
What a job you have, huh?
Oh, it's,
Yeah.
I'm telling you, Jennifer, there are so many moving pieces. If anyone ever saw, I mean, and this is just one small area.
Right.
We've been talking one department
Yeah.
out of
Yeah,
12.
exactly.
But yeah, I mean, and these are things that, we have to keep a close eye on because, when you have the legislature making laws that potentially are going to have a huge impact on the value of your utilities in town, that means higher taxes for the residents that are
Right.
living there because you have to
Right.
make up the money somehow.
Right.
So that burden then shifts to the residents when that happens. This power plant, they're our largest taxpayer in town, $9 million of revenue every year. Now, here's the interesting thing.
So they want to drop that to 4.5.
Well, essentially, yeah, that's what would happen.
Essentially, yeah.
They were valued. We had them valued for $430 million for 5 years straight, and that was an agreement we had come to. They then got bought out by a Texas company, threw all the local people out. We had told them at the time they were purchased for $500 million. We said we would go up to 470. We didn't even tell them we'd go up to 500, but we said we'll increment you.
Because value was pretty much established when it sold, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
They now say they're worth literally half of that,
Yeah.
$250 million.
Can't blame them. They're playing the game.
Sure they are.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
and they're playing the game, and they see the others playing the game, and so they're going to go after, what they want to go after.
Well, now I'm nervous.
Yeah, I mean, it's we'll do our best, and we've got the attorney that's representing us is fantastic, and I know he'll do his best to represent the town and make sure we keep the value we can. But this is what we're facing right now.
And so this is another expense of the town, is for the town to defend itself in order to collect the appropriate amount, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned abatements.
Right.
So we always get the most number of abatements after a revaluation
Of
year.
course, right.
So last night, the council had actually 60 abatements before them to sign off on. Now,
I filed mine in March, I think. So.
Oh, did you?
Yeah.
Oh, they may have signed off.
They may have signed. I don't know.
I don't know what the outcome was. You
I
can
don't
find out,
either.
I'm sure, soon enough. But they did sign off on 60 last night. And when we set the budget, we have what's called overlay monies
Right.
that we build into the budget. And those overlay monies are so that anticipating abatements are going to happen,
Right.
we're not scrambling to find the money.
Exactly.
Kind of similar to that, we have, I want to say, probably 4 or 5 outstanding abatement cases right now that are in court. Some with the utilities.
Right. Big ones, I assume.
Yeah, they are.
Yeah.
And so we've set aside money just in case, a settlement doesn't go the way we're anticipating it to go. So we're always planning ahead for these things and hedging our bets too, as far as how much money we have to put aside to plan for these
That's
scenarios.
so interesting. So in Londonderry, so we're a town form of government with a town meeting and a town council. So is the town council the board of assessors essentially?
No, we have our assessing department.
Yeah.
We have a chief assessor who he and his staff do all the assessments in town. The board of selectmen or the town council, they are just in charge of signing off on things like abatement. So the assessor will make a recommendation to deny or grant an abatement, and then the council will sign off on that, whether or not they agree or disagree with his decision on that. By the way, Pennachuck and Manchester Waterworks, they're also
I was going to ask
utilities.
about Pennachuck. Okay. All right. So we've been talking a lot about, the budget and the valuation and all that. But the thing is when I get my bill, it's not just the local town tax rate. There's a school tax rate, there's a county tax rate, and I think a state. Is that right?
Statewide school
Statewide.
tax.
So those budgets can change.
Absolutely.
Your phone will still be the one that rings.
No question.
Yeah.
On all 4.
Right. Exactly.
Even though I have nothing to do with 3 of them.
Right. Right.
And again, I don't blame people for not knowing this because you just assume when you get your tax bill, that is the town of Londonderry.
It's got the town of Londonderry name and seal on
exactly.
it. Yeah.
It doesn't have the school seal, even though the school makes up the greatest portion of that tax bill.
Yeah.
They're the lion's share. They're 70% of the tax bill. But people call us when they're unhappy with their taxes.
And the school budget also is getting revenue from the state portion. And so I imagine they have a lot of moving parts as well.
They do. Yeah. They have the same issues we have where they estimate their revenues, but they don't actually know what's going to happen until later in the year after the appropriations have already been voted on.
And I've always looked at the town budget and said, how much impact could we actually have? Because you've got fixed costs there.
Right.
So first of all, on the tax bill, so there's county, there's state, there's schools. So when we vote on town budget, we're only voting on a certain percentage of what's going to be our tax rate anyway.
Right.
And then you've got some bonds, right?
Mm-hmm. But those are included with your...
But those are fixed.
Correct.
Like my vote is not going to change.
Right. So you're
some of fixed expenses.
Correct.
Right.
Your debt service is built into your operating budget.
Right.
So once you vote on a bond and it's been approved, that now becomes part of your debt service. So you're not going to change that.
Not going to change that.
No. And I always, when people always say, well, was there a way to cut the budget? I always say to them, well, if you're looking to cut the budget, really the only area that's going to have any impact is personnel. Because your personnel is making up 85% of your budget.
Like any business.
Absolutely.
Any ongoing concern. That's labor's usually your highest expense. Yeah.
I mean, if you look at our budgets over the years, anytime we come in with, so you can never spend more than your appropriations, right? So you're always coming in with some kind of underspend. If you're going over, then you're going to be out of a job because you can't spend more than what you've been allowed to do. So you come in under, but typically those under expenditures come from personnel savings. As I always the way I explained it to me was when we're doing our budget, you're budgeting at 100% of personnel. You assume all your personnel are going to be there.
Right.
Inevitably, that doesn't happen. People retire. They may leave for another job.
Or they go on sick leave or,
Sure. But but except sick leave, you're still paying them often. Right. Yeah. But, and especially in the case of police and fire, if someone does leave, the onboarding can take up to 6 months. So now that position's vacant for that time. So typically any savings that you're bringing in at the end of the year, you'll find are in personnel savings. If you look at the other lines, equipment purchases, training, those sorts of line items, right? A lot of times those are over budget because we've been operating, at least on the town side, under a default budget for at least my whole time there. So for 8 years, we've had a default budget, which means
So every time there's like, here's the proposed budget, here's the default budget.
Yep.
We end up with the default budget,
right,
which is basically just saying everything continues as usual.
same amount.
Yeah.
The only things that can change are your contractual issues. So personnel.
Right.
So if your healthcare goes up, that goes up in the default budget. If the contract said employees get a 2% raise, that goes up in default. But if your training line was $20,000 in 2011, it's $20,000 in 2020.
Right.
Well, training costs go up.
Of
right?
course. Right.
So your
And equipment costs go up,
right.
and
utility
insurance costs go up.
Utility costs.
Right.
We've kept utility costs the same.
No way.
Yes.
For 8 years.
We've had to keep them the same.
Yeah.
So, and I explained this to the town council when we were doing the budget last November. I said, we've been robbing Peter to pay Paul. We save money on the personnel and we go, okay, so-and-so is not going to be hired for 3 months. So we'll take the savings there and pay for the utility costs that we know are going to be over because we've never increased on that. Yeah. That's literally how we've been operating. And what I told them was, I said, we've been able to do it. We're getting by. At some point, we're not going to be able to do it anymore.
We're going to pay the piper eventually.
We are, yeah. And I don't know when that will be, but it's getting closer and closer every year.
Well, so you've been a big proponent, I know, of commercial development up by the airport.
Yep.
And so that's adding to our tax base.
Yep.
But if we're level budgeting, that's not actually helping. It helps the tax rate, but it doesn't help you with the budget.
It makes budgeting more difficult.
Okay.
Yes, it does. And what it also does do is it makes you look at personnel hirings differently, because now you're looking at them in the not necessarily of, do we need this position, but do we need this position for 6 months? Can we hold off 6 months on this because we're going to need money to pay another area,
And then we also got a contract for our police department to work at the airport.
Right.
So explain that to me.
So the airport pays for all of our. So the airport entered into a contract with the town of Londonderry back in I believe the early 2000s to do all of its airport security. Previously, it was the Rockingham County Sheriff's Department. It was either Rockingham County or it was actually probably Hillsborough County that did it, since the airport is
in Hillsborough County.
The airport's in it was either Hillsborough or Rockingham.
Right, exactly.
The airport's in Rockingham, but their Manchester Airport, which is Hillsborough.
Exactly, so close, right.
It was one of the sheriff's departments.
Okay.
It then went to Londonderry, and so we've had it ever since. But they pay for Londonderry's budget to do the policing
They
there.
pay for what they use, or do we actually end up having a little... Does it offset some of our expenses?
No, it doesn't offset any of our expenses,
Okay.
but they actually pay for the personnel costs there. Now, the airport, right, they're struggling because of the pandemic now.
Right, of course.
And they it's so unfortunate too, because I feel like they were starting to get into a little bit of a good groove right before the pandemic. Their numbers were leveling off. Now they're really struggling. And so they told us that they were having to cut 3 positions from that budget.
Okay.
Now, fortunately, we had open positions on the town side that we could fill with those officers.
Oh, good. Okay. Yeah.
But if that didn't happen, those officers probably would have been laid off.
There would have been layoffs. Yeah. I heard a rumor. I don't remember where I heard it from, but that Londonderry used to own the land that the airport was on and then gave it to Manchester.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm familiar with the story. I'm not sure of all of the details, but yes, it was Grenier Field Airport, and Londonderry had the opportunity. I'm guessing this is like 50 years ago, maybe 60 years ago, had the opportunity to own the airport, the town of Londonderry.
Yeah.
Well, Londonderry owns the land. We still own the land. We don't own the airport.
Oh, this is getting more complicated.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this is okay. So all right. Let me back up a little bit.
Okay.
So the city of Manchester does own land in Londonderry. Okay. So I know it's crazy.
Yeah,
the
is
city
crazy.
owns land. The land is in Londonderry, but the city of Manchester owns it.
So like we tax the city of Manchester.
Well, see, that's the thing. We can't. One municipality cannot tax another municipality.
Oh my goodness.
Right?
Yeah.
But you can tax them on improvements on the land.
Of course. Okay.
Right?
Yep.
So, so that land is owned by Manchester Airport. So yes, at one time Londonderry was offered to own all of it. Londonderry said, no, we don't want it.
Right.
And so it was given over to the city of Manchester, right? So the city of Manchester and the airport, they own parcels that are in Londonderry, and we cannot tax them on those parcels, except for now. So EFI, which is Electronics for Imaging, great company, manufacturing company. They're based out of Oakland, California. They built a facility that is in Londonderry that is on city-owned land.
Okay.
All right.
Yep.
We can't tax them on the land, but we can tax them on the building.
Exactly.
So they pay a lease payment to the city of Manchester.
Right, to lease the land.
So the airport gets the lease money.
Okay.
We get the tax money for the building, and then nobody gets taxed on the land.
That's really wild.
Yeah.
That is really wild. Yeah.
So similarly, the airport, which is in Londonderry but owned by the city of Manchester, they pay us what's called a pilot payment, a payment in lieu of taxes.
Yeah. And
because we can't just tax them. So that tax payment this year was $700,000. It has a 2% escalator. Now, someone might think, in fact, the airport did, that, well, this seems like a lot, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So we said, okay, how about this? Let's look at it from if we were just straight taxing you. Let's say we could tax you on all the value of the airport property. What would it be? Any guesses how much their tax bill would be?
$500,000?
$3 million.
No. Wow.
So they're getting a deal.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow.
But again, this agreement was worked out
a long
many
time
years ago.
Yeah.
Between the town and the city of Manchester. Yeah.
So we're running a little bit late, but then that brings us to Woodmont, because Woodmont is going to be an enormous change in Londonderry. And it's going to increase the tax base.
It will, yeah. And thus far, it's been tax positive. You always look at when you say is a place tax positive or tax negative, you have to look at how often are services being called out to a place like that, right?
Right.
Are they adding kids into the school system and that sort of thing?
Exactly.
Right now, Woodmont in its infancy stages has been tax positive for the town, and I think it'll stay that way for some time to come. But people are going to see, it's Woodmont. There's so many different
everybody has
opinions
exactly.
on it.
Yeah.
But in some ways, I think it's good that it's gone. It's as slow as it has because it's given people time to get used to it. It's not like everything showed up all at once.
Right.
There is a beautiful independent living facility that's being built there in the next couple of years called the Baldwin.
I've started to see ads
so
for
it's
that.
like 290 units, very high end. I think when people see it, they'll be very pleased with the product that's
my mom's
there.
going to want in if it's very high end.
Yeah.
She basically wants to retire to a cruise.
Oh, does she? Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, well,
where they just wait on her hand and foot. Yeah.
Well, she might like it here.
I think she might like it.
Yeah. It's and that will do great for property values in Londonderry. Every time I see new construction that's starting out at $500,000, $600,000, it's like that helps property values. I know there were a lot of people who were upset when all those apple trees came down on Gilchrist Road where that new subdivision that's part of Woodmont is going in.
It's part of Woodmont,
But I have had some neighbors there say, as disappointed I am with the trees going away, those homes are going to have positive effect for the home value, for my home value.
Well, and all of the retail and restaurants that are going to go in there are going to make this a little bit of a destination. I'm pretty excited about it.
Yeah.
It's not in my backyard directly, so that might color it, and I'm in real estate, so that might color it. I would like to finish up just by letting people know what tax exemptions are available. Is it elderly and veterans?
You get a veterans tax credit.
Yep.
You can get an elderly, which is means tested, but they'll look at your income. So you can get a tax exemption up to certain amounts, depending on your income and your age. So that's another one. There's a disability, deaf and blind tax exemption you can get as well. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. I believe there may be a low income tax credit you can get as well.
Okay.
But if people are interested in, because we do have, and the biggest ones are the elderly and the veterans.
Right.
And the town, I think, has been very generous in both of those areas. In fact, if you were to take all of the veterans and elderly tax exemptions that we're giving out, it's about 20 cents on the tax rate.
Okay.
So that's 20 cents that people are paying in higher taxes
So
because
that
of all the
so that other
exemptions.
people can stay in their
That's right.
homes. Yeah. Yeah.
Yep.
So the veterans credit, it's just a straight credit off of the tax bill.
Correct.
Is it
Yeah.
$500?
I believe it's $500.
I think it's
Yeah.
$500 a year. Okay.
And then there's a service-connected disability veterans tax credit that's a little bit different. I think the credit on that one is higher than the straight veterans tax credit. It's at least $500. It may have gone up to $750.
So they would go to the town website, to the assessor's department to get
Right.
that information? Yeah.
Yep, they can get it from that, or they can call the assessing department and they can walk them through all the various tax credits and exemptions that someone might be eligible for.
Okay. That's excellent.
Yeah.
That's great.
Absolutely.
Well, this has been fascinating. I have more questions, but this has been
I'll
very
come back.
fascinating.
I'll,
We would love to have you back.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
No, and thanks for
So
having me
So
in.
the bottom line is that the June tax bill is an estimated bill, and the tax bill at the end of the year is
That's the true up.
your true
Yes.
up.
Yep.
And the town manager and the town hall don't have control over all of it.
No, we don't. Only a small portion.
Only a
of it.
small portion, yeah. So thank you. Thank you for your
Thank
hard
you,
work,
Jennifer.
too.
Yeah.
All right.
You're welcome.
And that's it for today. Thank you for getting real about real estate with us. And we'd like to ask you to like, share, and subscribe Spouses Talking Houses. Until next time.
Music courtesy of the Eric Lindbergh Trio. Please visit his website at www.ericlindberghworld.com. Jennifer and Brian are licensed to practice real estate in New Hampshire and Massachusetts. Brian is also a certified general appraiser in New Hampshire. They are not lawyers, accountants, home inspectors, or therapists. Real estate customs and rules may be different in your area. Each Keller Williams Realty office is independently owned and operated. The Realtor name is trademarked to members of the National Association of Realtors. If you are currently under contract with a real estate agent, this is not intended as a solicitation. Views expressed on this podcast by Jennifer may not be shared by Brian and vice versa, nor are they necessarily the views of Keller Williams Realty.
The views and opinions expressed by the hosts, guests, or callers of this program do not necessarily reflect the opinions of the Studio 21 Podcast Café, the United Podcast Network, its partners, or affiliates.